There is a persistent belief that acquiring money changes who people are. The assumption appears in every culture: wealth corrupts. Poverty ennobles, sudden fortune transforms character. But this interpretation rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of how psychological traits function. Money does not create new characteristics. It removes obstacles that previously masked what was already present. What appears to be transformation is actually revelation. The question is not whether money changes people. The question is, what specific trait does money expose when constraints disappear? Human behavior exists within boundaries. Physical limits, social pressure, resource scarcity, temporal urgency, these forces shape daily decisions. Some individuals operate one way under constraint and an entirely different way when those constraints are lifted. Others maintain behavioral consistency regardless of external conditions. This variability is called constraint sensitivity, the degree to which external limitations govern behavior. A person with high constraint sensitivity modifies behavior significantly when restrictions change. Their actions under scarcity look nothing like their actions under abundance. Someone with low constraint sensitivity behaves similarly whether constrained or free. The constraint itself does not matter as much as the internal regulatory system. Money is simply one type of constraint removal. It eliminates financial pressure, reduces forced delay, expands choice architecture, and removes certain social consequences. When these specific constraints disappear, the behavioral patterns that were always present but previously suppressed become visible. Behavioral inhibition operates through a simple process. External limits require internal suppression. When you cannot afford something, you do not simply lack access, you also build cognitive patterns around denial. When social consequences punish certain behaviors, you develop suppression strategies. When time scarcity forces prioritization, you construct decision frameworks that reflect urgency, not preference. These suppression mechanisms are not personality. They are responses to environment. Research in self-regulation demonstrates that behavioral control has two sources: external enforcement and internal governance. External enforcement includes laws, financial limits, social judgment, physical barriers. Internal governance includes impulse control, delay tolerance, value-driven decision-making, and reflective capacity. When external enforcement is strong, it is difficult to observe internal governance. A person who never steals may refrain because theft is illegal and punished, or because they find theft inherently unacceptable. The constraint masks the motivation. Remove the constraint, make theft undetectable and unpunished, and the underlying motivation becomes observable. Money functions identically. It removes the external enforcement created by scarcity. What remains is internal governance, now visible without interference. The critical point: the internal governance was always there. It did not appear when money arrived. It was simply hidden beneath layers of forced adaptation. Under financial constraint, generosity is limited by capacity. A person with minimal resources cannot give large amounts regardless of inclination. When resources increase, the constraint disappears. Some individuals immediately expand charitable behavior, others do not. The standard interpretation: money made the first group generous and the second group selfish. The accurate interpretation: money revealed pre-existing differences in prosocial orientation that scarcity had compressed into similar external behavior. Studies of lottery winners and inheritance recipients show bimodal distribution. Some increase charitable giving proportionally to wealth. Others decrease it proportionally. Both groups existed before the windfall. The windfall simply removed the binding constraint that forced similar external behavior. Financial scarcity imposes risk aversion. When survival depends on stable income, risky decisions carry existential threat. This creates uniform external behavior. Nearly everyone avoids financial risk when resources are minimal. Increased wealth removes survival pressure. Risk no longer threatens basic security. At this point, individuals diverge. Some maintain conservative approaches. Others shift toward high-variance strategies, aggressive investments, speculative ventures, leveraged positions. This is not wealth creating recklessness. This is wealth revealing underlying risk preferences that poverty had suppressed into uniform caution. Neurobiological research on risk assessment shows stable individual differences in dopaminergic response to uncertainty. These differences exist regardless of financial status, but only manifest behaviorally when financial constraints permit expression. Social norms function as behavioral constraints. Consequences for norm violation, social exclusion. Reputational damage, legal penalties, enforce compliance. Money can insulate against some of these consequences. Wealth provides access to private spaces, legal representation, alternative social networks, and financial buffers against certain forms of social punishment. When this insulation increases, some individuals begin testing boundaries they previously respected. They demand preferential treatment, ignore minor regulations, expect accommodation, or disregard social conventions. The common interpretation, money created entitlement. The psychological reality, money removed the consequences that previously suppressed entitlement that was already present. The trait did not appear, the inhibition disappeared. Research on social norm compliance shows that individuals differ in what psychologists call norm sensitivity, responsiveness to behavioral standards independent of enforcement. High norm sensitivity maintains compliance even when consequences are absent. Low norm sensitivity relies on external enforcement. Wealth reduces enforcement, revealing the underlying variance. Scarcity forces delay. Insufficient funds mean waiting for purchases. Postponing consumption, deferring gratification. This creates the appearance of patience. Abundance removes forced delay. Desired objects become immediately accessible. At this point, underlying differences in delay tolerance become apparent. Some individuals maintain deliberate decision-making processes, regardless of access. Others shift toward immediate acquisition patterns. Walter Mischel's research on delay of gratification established that delay capacity is a stable trait observable from childhood. Financial constraints impose artificial delay on everyone. Masking individual differences. Financial freedom removes artificial delay, exposing the variation that was always present. The fundamental attribution error explains most misinterpretation. Observers overweight dispositional explanations for their own behavior and situational explanations for others' behavior. When evaluating themselves, people recognize how circumstances shape choices. When evaluating others, people attribute behavior to character. This asymmetry reverses when someone's circumstances change. Observers assume the person changed because the situation changed. They fail to recognize that the situation was suppressing pre-existing traits. There is also temporal asymmetry. Observers rarely have access to an individual's internal state before constraint removal. They observe behavior under constraint, then behavior after constraint removal. The difference appears to be change in the person rather than change in what the person is free to express. Behavioral economics research on revealed preference demonstrates this principle. You cannot know someone's true preferences until constraints are removed. Behavior under constraint reflects the intersection of preference and limitation. Only behavior under freedom reveals preference clearly. A common assumption: educated people, morally principled people, or self-aware people will not exhibit negative trait revelation when constraints are removed. They know better, they have values, they can self-regulate. This assumption misunderstands the mechanism. Intelligence and values influence which traits someone develops. They do not prevent existing traits from becoming visible when constraints disappear. Consider impulse control. A highly intelligent person may have poor impulse regulation. Intelligence allows sophisticated rationalization of impulsive decisions, but it does not eliminate the impulse itself. When financial constraints are removed, the impulsive pattern becomes visible regardless of intellectual capacity. Similarly, stated values predict behavior poorly when constraints change. Research on value-action consistency shows that expressed values correlate weakly with behavior under stress or freedom. Values govern behavior most strongly in moderate constraint environments where both reflection and consequence are present. Remove consequences, and behavior often diverges from stated values. Self-awareness follows the same pattern. Knowing you have a trait does not eliminate it. A person may recognize they have low frustration tolerance, high status sensitivity, or poor delay capacity. This recognition does not prevent these traits from manifesting when environmental constraints are removed. It may allow better prediction but not prevention. The mechanism is simple. Psychological traits are not beliefs. They are stable patterns of response. Changing beliefs does not automatically change response patterns, especially when those patterns have neurobiological components or were established early in development. Money operates as a psychological mirror. It does not add features, it removes obscuring layers. What you see in increased reflection is what was always there, simply not visible under previous conditions. This creates discomfort. People prefer transformation narratives. The idea that wealth reveals rather than changes suggests that personality is more fixed than we typically acknowledge. It implies that the version of yourself operating under constraint is not necessarily the real you suppressing base impulses, nor is the version under freedom a corrupted form. Both are you responding to different conditions. The pattern extends beyond money. Any significant constraint removal, sudden freedom from restrictive relationships, retirement from demanding careers, recovery from chronic illness, release from legal supervision produces the same revelation effect. Observers interpret behavioral changes as transformation. The psychological reality is that constraints were masking stable traits. There is no moral conclusion here. Constraint sensitivity is not virtue or vice. It is a dimension of individual difference. Some traits revealed under freedom are prosocial. Others are antisocial, some are neutral. The revelation itself is a mechanical process, not a moral one. What money reveals is simply what was always there, waiting for conditions that permitted expression. The trait being revealed is how you function when external limits no longer force your behavior into particular channels. That trait existed before, the money just made it visible. The question is not what money does to people. The question is what people were already prepared to do once nothing stopped them.